Hi everyone, long time no see. Hope you've been well. I've missed you all. Cool, okay. So this is another talk I'm going to be doing. I'm still not even sure how I got signed up for 2 talks, but this is good. This has been really good fun challenge balancing too. I'm going to talk about something that I've been really excited about for a few years now, and that's UIKit on macOS. So, as you know, a lot of great stuff got announced at WWDC this year. We had dark mode for iOS, Swift got some kind of UI framework, Apple announced the most ridiculously expensive cheese grater in the world. But the thing that I really was lost it over, the thing that everything else pales compared to this. This was the complete one that just won me over, and that was the fact that now the Xbox One S and PlayStation 4 controller works with Apple TV. Like everything else I was kind of expecting, but that one I was in the crowd just going, what? For like the entire keynote after that. Like I was just like, that is something I never thought I'd ever see. Anyway, so that's the main thing I was really excited for. But here's the other thing I was excited for. So just to go back in time a little bit to explain the process of how this happened. The iPhone happened. Doesn't look like that, does it? That was the best. I loved it when Steve did those kinds of jokes. The iPhone happened, and Steve basically said it runs what was it called back then? macOS 10. And everyone's like, whoa, that's crazy. It's a portable device running a full-blown desktop operating system. Now that was true to a certain extent. It shares most of the components of macOS 10, but where it actually diverges is macOS uses a top-level framework called AppKit for all of the system interactions and all of the UI. And then on iOS, we have one called UIKit. Hopefully this isn't new to all of you. But the rest of the stack below it is the same. That being said, AppKit and UIKit are quite different. AppKit, according to the headers, was started in 1994. That was 25 years ago. I was in grade 3 at the time, just in case you had any indications of how much longevity these header files have had. But the nice thing about this is basically Apple had one, like when hardware was the way it was in the 90s, I have to say the 90s, versus how it was in the 2000s, because of the such differences in hardware, the mindsets behind these 2 frameworks is actually quite different. So UIKit was like an approval, going back to the drawing board for AppKit. So a lot of the concepts in AppKit don't actually exist in UIKit. And that was very interesting, but it's also a bit of a downer because it means if you join the party from the UIKit side, jumping to the AppKit side is actually kind of hard because there's a whole bunch of mindsets that don't inherently make intuitive sense. So as a result of that, if you started off as an iOS developer, but then you want to make an app for the Mac, actually it's a lot harder than you realize. And as a result, a downside of this is a lot of great software is on iOS, but there's not as much on macOS as there possibly could be. And I'm very interested in this because one of my little side projects is I make a comic book reader app called iComics, which in this day and age is a very uncool name, calling things iThings, but that's okay, I'm working on that. It's also really hard to trademark, I found out. But basically, I'm excited about this because this app is just a JPEG renderer for all intents and purposes. So it should be really easy to move it to the Mac. Making a Mac version of this should not be hard. And so I've been looking at options to make a Mac version for a long time, and I actually found quite a few very interesting alternatives. One was a project called Chameleon, which is I think by the Twitterific folks, and they did this incredible thing where they literally rewrote UIKit. They just took the headers and implemented all the logic under the hood to an AppKit abstraction. The idea is you could drop an iOS app onto Mac, and then automatically, because of the source compatibility, it would abstract to AppKit. So things like UI scroll view would map to scroll. Is it NS scroll view in Mac? Okay, thank you. Things like that. When you look at the GitHub account, this is a ridiculous amount of work. And the tricky thing about that was every time Apple adds a new version of iOS, suddenly they had to support that too. So it became very unwieldy very quickly. Something that's also been hilarious, I don't know how many people know about this, is at one point Microsoft really wanted people to make apps for Windows Phone. So to help with that, they made a thing called the Windows Objective-C Bridge. And this is literally weeks before Swift got announced, which is a bit of a thoughts and prayers there. But it's just this one's really cool because apparently they took the Chameleon kit as a base and they just kind of re-engineered it so the same concept. You implement your UIKit APIs and underneath you're rendering right to DirectX or something like that. It's hilarious seeing UIView.mm copyright Microsoft. But this is actually interesting because now it's still valid because maybe even though Windows Phone's gone away, this is still valid for Windows 10 and Xbox. So in a hilarious twist, it's been more possible to write apps for iOS apps for Xbox than it has been for macOS at this point, and Windows. So then back in 2017, a little rumor started happening. John Gruber picked up on Fireball. A project internally at Apple called Marzipan was happening. And the idea was a unified iOS and macOS experience. And everyone thought that sounded like an awful idea because these things are supposed to be separate. But it was very interesting to hear that Apple was actually working on this. What did it mean exactly? And then in 2018, ostensibly because they couldn't hide it because it was very obvious with the News app and the Stocks app on Mojave, Apple announced this thing that was officially called the Sneak Peek, and every other name was not acknowledged. Where this was a UIKit layer on top of AppKit, where AppKit wasn't going away, but this is like an extension. And that was promised to us a year later. And funny enough, now it's a year later, so it's finally on top of us, which is awesome. And I've been waiting a whole year, being like, yes, 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 I'm down for this, I want to see this. And it was finally announced as Project Catalyst. And it's had a few name changes since then. It was called UIKit for Mac, and now it's called Mac Catalyst. And every beta of Xcode has been like rotating the names. Now it gets really confusing. In any case, I'm really excited about this, so I was going to say I got started right away. And here's where I learned about it. So I downloaded the Catalina beta. First things first, in Xcode, there's an extra option now in Xcode, just Mac. You click that, you hit build. And I hit build. I put iComics, I gave it to iComics, and I hit build. And straight away it just said no. And I was like, wait, what? And then, like Zach was mentioning yesterday, basically what happened is in the process, of this of Xcode 11, Apple also brought out a new format for frameworks called XC Framework, and kind of interestingly enough, binary frameworks compiled for the simulator don't actually work for Mac Catalyst. You need to recompile another x86 64 slice for Mac Catalyst. And the one that was holding me back in my project was Realm, ironically enough. But now, thankfully, Realm have actually released Mac Catalyst compatible versions of the binary. But this is going to be a bit of a problem for the time being because it's going to be necessary. This is how you actually build it, according to the Apple forums. For a little while, it's going to be a matter of like waiting for all the third-party dependencies to actually adopt support for Mac Catalyst, especially if they're precompiled releases. But that is the main hurdle. After that, most of it works. The other half is there's obviously a lot of APIs on iOS, things like the gyro and stuff like that just don't make sense. So they just don't work in Mac Catalyst. So we tried it again. This time, because iComics is completely broken, I used one of my open source libraries. And apologies to those in this photo, but I just went onto the DevWorld Flickr account, and I found one of the pictures from 2010. That's me in the middle there. Paris and John are at the front. Nothing's changed. I've noticed, like, I'm sitting next to James there. I didn't even know James at this time. On the other side's UIKit. Like, there's a bunch of people who I met after the fact, but this is like the first photo. We're all just sitting next to each other. No one knows each other. It's crazy. But this is the thing. Like, that was a bit of a sidestep. This is one of my libraries. This is actually a mock-up of the simulator. But this is what it looked like in Mac Catalyst. The only thing I changed was I changed it from simulator to my app name. That's basically the only difference I noticed when I ran it for the first time. And I was like, wait a minute. So all Mac Catalyst really is this just the iOS simulator. I was like, wait a minute, okay. I was expecting, like, when I hit that checkbox, I get a whole new little Xcode target and everything saying, like, this is now an app, NS app delegate and everything. It's not. It's actually just the iOS app. Just like how tvOS is the same set of APIs but rendered differently on a TV, this is basically the same APIs not even rendering differently on the Mac, which is really interesting. I was like, that's a weird flex, but okay. And that raised up further questions because I thought we were actually going to be on the AppKit level, but we're not. We're actually on the UIKit level. And any Mac integrations, any AppKit level integrations that Apple provided, they're actually just APIs on top of UIKit, which is very interesting. Another thing, which is different to the simulator, is you can actually resize it to any way you want. So suddenly you have to be really conscientious about your auto layout and your layout, and even things like sizing thumbnails and things like that. So this is definitely a new challenge that iOS developers never had to face before, and suddenly you have to deal with every potential possible size and aspect ratio, which I'm still thinking about because I pre-bake all my thumbnails, and so this means I have to actually think about, do I have to make my thumbnails scalable, or have a range of thumbnails, things like that. Another thing is, like, thinking it's like the simulator, I keep clicking and dragging, trying to like do the scroll view, but it's like, it's not like that. It's actually like the scroll bars in macOS. You actually have to, like, do 2-finger swipes on laptops or click and drag the scroll bar off to the side. So again, there's provisions for UIKit controls to behave like more intuitively like macOS controls. And this is one other thing. The content's scaled. So what that means is, Apple talked about this in their talks. iOS and macOS have two different font sizes, and that's ostensibly because iOS is operated by our giant, huge, fat human fingers, and macOS, and so the default font size for a single label is 17 points. I think that's right. And because macOS doesn't use giant fingers, it uses a really tiny cursor, everything on macOS is inherently smaller because everything, you have a lot more precision on macOS. So as a result, the default label size on macOS is 14 points. And so what that means is Mac Catalyst, without you doing anything, automatically scales your content down how it would appear on an iOS device by 77% to basically make it look like that if you designed everything at 17 points, it'll look native at 14 points on macOS. That being said, I never knew this was a thing. Like the second when they said the default 17 points, I was like, I never knew that, okay. Which means that if you weren't actually designing with this kind of mindset in mind, your apps might not look very good on Mac Catalyst out of the box. You might actually have to do some extra tweaking of your sizes. But another thing, because it's all it's basically the simulator, I think the Home app proved this really well. If you do not a lot of work, it really does look like an iOS app in a window on your desktop. And this is even more highlighted by the fact you can actually present modal UI view controllers, and they look like normal iOS UI view controllers. And that's interesting to me and also a bit worrying, because I'm getting the feeling that when this goes live, a lot of people are just going to do a raw dump of their iPad app and just put it on the App Store. And we're going to get a lot of like, iOS-y kind of apps on Mac. And I feel like this is a problem that the games industry has as well. Like when the barrier to entry keeps getting lower and lower, the quality of a lot of the work that comes out isn't as good as it possibly could be. Like there's a lot of games on Steam right now that are just Unity demo projects with free Unity Asset Store assets in them. But all is not lost. Like this is a thing that can happen, but we still have the building blocks there, so it's something. So when we're talking about updating an iOS app or iPad app, sorry, to macOS, what can we actually do? So first things first, the main thing you can do is tab bars. So UI window, so basically every iOS app, well most iOS apps these days have a very traditional model where you have a centralized UI tab bar controller, and that just kicks you off to different parts of the app. So you could very easily on Mac Catalyst just leave the iOS tab bar in there, but it makes more sense, it's more native feeling on the Mac that you actually move that to the top. And most macOS apps will have their own centralized tab bar controller in the toolbar above. So this is actually just a property of UI window scene. So again, we're not actually going back to the AppKit level. It's actually just a little entry point into the AppKit world from UIKit. But this is basically this is another point of like the new UI scene API indicate you can have different windows. This way you could have multiple windows in your app, and each one could potentially have a different tab bar. But one thing Apple made sure to point out is once you set this, it doesn't really change. Like this is supposed to be your single point of entry to your app. This is not a per view controller sort of situation. This is per app. So the idea is you can't really click through to new screens and have this change. This is kind of the kind of thing that's there forever. So the Home app was an example of an app that was very obviously just taken from the iPad and put straight on the Mac without too much changes. But the one that was really, really well executed was the News app. You basically can't tell this is an iPad app. I think this is a really good example. One of the reasons why it's, and as you can see, like if you look at the iPad version, these labels are just a lot bigger. As you can see, it just scales it down. And as long as you've got the font and placing correct, like it actually looks really, really like native. One thing they do here though is they do the macOS systems feature where the front-facing window actually has a translucent background on its accessory view controller off to the left. And this is really easy. This is like possibly too easy. I was like, oh, that's like a UI color, right? Or something like that. It's not even a UI color. It's literally a property of UI split view controller now. We just set the primary background style to sidebar. And then we do that. I think it even scales it down as well. There's actually some other little mechanisms it does to adapt it to macOS. But this will then get you that really nice translucency looking effect. I think this was mentioned yesterday, I can't remember for sure, but it is actually possible to detect mouse over events, which is kind of weird on the UIKit level, because you can't hover your finger over the screen. But there's actually UI hover gesture recognizer that you can actually detect when an element, a mouse is hovering over an element, and you can change its state. Maybe you can make it zoom or highlight or change color or have an underline. That's actually possible. But again, it's interesting. This isn't the AppKit level. This is still the iOS level. This is all like abstractions over the concept. But this is what I'm talking about. Like herein lies the rub. All these APIs are kind of like trying to avoid the elephant in the room, and that is AppKit. So what if you actually do want to use AppKit, because AppKit is the first-class citizen on the Mac, what can you do? Because the Home app does this. Like if you want to change the color of your light, it'll show up in the window like an iOS-style color picker. And that works. And for all intents and purposes, like having a thing is better than not having the thing. But if you want it to feel really native, like AppKit provides a lot of system UI elements. Probably the main one is like the color picker, things that everyone's familiar with, and they kind of expect that to appear when you click "I want to change the color." But officially, there's no really way to get this. Like I just said, officially there's no way to get this. Because, as you can see, it's not possible to actually call AppKit code from UIKit. But there is actually a way. It's not an official way, but someone found a way. Steve Charlton-Smith, the crazy madman that he is, found out that it's actually possible to create an NS bundle in your app project that contains AppKit code, and then you can actually use the inter-process communication APIs of AppKit, of the Mac, to then have AppKit instances of like NS Window talking to your UIKit instances inside your own Mac Catalyst process. So suddenly it is actually possible, even though it's not official, there is actually a way that you can actually have two separate, like basically frameworks talking to each other. Now obviously the trade-off is you cannot actually like mix and match AppKit code. Like one window has to be UIKit, one window has to be AppKit. But the fact is that this is possible means that it is actually very, very real that you could actually make a really native feeling Mac app with a primarily UIKit facing front, but with a lot of auxiliary AppKit components around it. I can't really go into too much detail about that one because it's really long, but he actually documented all of it on his website, highcaffeinecontent.com. So if you actually are really interested about this, I recommend checking that blog post out. It's incredibly fascinating. And it definitely shows that even though this stuff's kind of new and kind of in flux, it's definitely off to a good start, and most of the things that I want to do with iComics are actually possible, so I'm really happy with this. So some of the takeaways, just to say today, it's still just an iOS app. Like I was assuming it would have been like Chameleon Kit when it came out, that it was actually just abstractions to the AppKit level from UIKit. It's not. It's basically the simulator running in a process. And now it makes sense why the iOS simulator also has metal backing. So now you have native performing simulator and native performing iOS apps on the Mac, thanks to the metal backing. Because the windows are resizable, probably your biggest challenge is making sure that your app can look okay at every single size. I remember back in the old days, we'd have clients who would send us iOS apps that were literally just screenshots with invisible buttons over the Photoshop buttons in the screenshots because they knew the iPhone screen size would never change. Those days are long over. There are ways to hook into AppKit, but again, no direct access, no official access in any case. And like I said before, the content's scaled down 77%. So if you were designing for some kind of sizing, some custom sizing that you hadn't actually considered this before, you might need to actually change the way your code renders. Again, as was shown yesterday, there are ways to check if you can do a macro check if you're running on Mac Catalyst. So a really naive but completely fine approach would be that you just check what platform you're on and change the font size accordingly. And again, things like supporting resizable text also goes towards this. All the elements look like iOS by default. Like it's not like Apple TV where certain controls will look like a different type of look just for the TV. Like if you put in an iOS control, it will look like an iOS control. And again, this is one of the biggest ones. You definitely need to recompile all of your binaries before they'll actually work. You can't just stick the simulator one in and get it to work. But yeah, so just to iterate what we talked about today, it's really easy. Just check Mac in Xcode 11 and it starts working. My recommendation is please, as you can see from those examples, like you can totally just ship an iPad app as a Mac app and that works. But with a little bit of effort, you can actually start making it look a lot more native. And I definitely encourage anyone doing this to have a really good think about your app. See what points feel really foreign on the Mac and see what you can do to make them feel more native. This is what I just said. And again, Steve Charlton-Smith has shown it is possible to actually hook into AppKit. So if you do have like a main middle view controller that can be iOS, but you do have all these auxiliary controls, preferences, windows, and things like that, that's possible. And if it's all feasible, I'd really recommend that you can try and implement that as much as possible. And yeah, let's make some great apps use this to make some really great apps. I think this is a really common running trend this year, but we got a lot of stuff, and it's kind of rough around the edges. I mean, macOS is one thing. SwiftUI is also something that is so new and so fresh that it changes and it breaks with every single beta. We're definitely going to have a few teething issues for a little while, I think. But the important thing is this is only going to be temporary, and if we contribute, file rate us and contribute and work out ways to get around the current problems, I think this is a brand new era for making software for Apple's platforms. It's very exciting. There's going to be some amazing stuff coming out, I think, and I can't wait to see it. Anyway, thanks again for watching.